Good evening, good evening, good evening. This is Reginal Drummer, the peopleologist and author of the book, Find Them, Focus, Follow, and Finish. Book that you can find everywhere that books are sold, and especially for your autographed copy, www.myheartshops.com/shop-1. Tonight, as we continue to look at staying ready and preparing ourselves at all times, we have an extended topic that we've been talking about on a couple of my platforms, Good News at Prime Time, as well as the We Are Ready and the Tell It Like It Is platforms. But we've just been having a conversation about the conflict, the war between Israel and Palestine. Israel and Palestine. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about how it affects us, how it affects us over here in America. If you look, there will be a lot of demonstrations, and those demonstrations will be on uh, support of both sides. And you might find yourself somewhere in the middle. Okay, there will be people discussing things that have going back 4,000 years. And I know sometimes people say, "What? 4,000 years? That should be, you know, that's too long for all of us." And then there will be people that bring you up to speed on things that have been going on for the last 73 years, 73 to 75 years, occupied territory over there in Israel, or the land formerly known as Palestine. We actually broke down some important key dates, many things that contributed to where we are right now, especially going back to World War One, and then finally World War Two, where uh, the people uh, that were uh, victimized under Hitler were given settlements in that land that we currently call Israel. There are many wars before, and we look at the involvement of so many countries, and we say, well, who's got the best interest? It can be a spiritual interest, but sometimes when we go a little bit deeper, we find out that it's a little bit deeper than that. Okay, this is a very important piece of land, and it's in position to watch over a particular area where a lot of traffic goes through, especially oil and a lot of other resources. So we're going to be looking at tonight, and as we unpackage it, I'm bringing a brother that's pretty well versed in this situation. We've had many discussions, and he joined us a couple of weeks ago. So I brought him back, and we're going to go a little in depth. And this is brother Akibulat, and he'll be joining us this evening, and he will share some points of view. Now, these are our points of view. Uh, we don't want to change nobody's perspective or redirect how you feel about the situation or whatever. We just want to put some information out that might help you deal with conversations that you're going to have in the barbershop, hair salon, at work, uh, many places that you go. And you would want to be a little bit up to speed on certain things. I encourage people, there's a couple of books that you can read that break down information, and some of those recent books, I have some of those books posted on our We Are Ready uh, Facebook page. But I'm seeing if we can get brother uh, Akibalon. How you doing, my brother? How you doing this evening?
Greetings to the folks in the ATL area, and you, Brother Drummer, and the sister as well. This is Brother Yokebulan calling you from the wilds of the USA, trying to shed some light on some of the craziness and bring some sanity and some little bit of clarity to some things that folks might be a little confused on. My profession is a cultural anthropologist, and I check the things that are hidden deep in history, on the surface of history, and that influence the cultural dynamic as we deal with it today. So I'm happy to be here to share with your listening audience and viewing audience some perspectives and some things that hopefully will get them to look at this thing in, a little different light and different perspective that'll hopefully elevate their understanding and also put very clearly and firmly their role into how the situation impacts and affects them.
Thank you, thank you. I know when we look at what's going on, a lot of our information we get from the media. A lot of our information we get from the media, and that's the the typical media. But as we, especially now, because we got social media, we got so many other uh, media sources that are right there on the ground. We can see some things that are not being seen on our regular uh, television media. And then that gives us a better insight of what's going on. Plus, we've seen people recently, I've seen Jewish people here in America that are showing their support for the people of Palestine. They denounce all the killing and all that, but that was a rare thing because they are actually being pigeonholed to look for, people to look at and say, well, these are the Jewish people, but we look at the government of Israel. Just like over here, we will look at the government of the United States of America. There's many things that the government of the United States of America does that we, the people, might not support. We patriots and everything, but we might not support that. And I recently saw a lot of groups of especially Jewish people, because they were being taunted over here because people thought they were not uh, given any type of clarity or support. So, they were defacing some synagogues. So they started to speak up. But all across, many of us will have to, I hate to say pick and choose, but we got to figure out who we're going to support, why we're going to support them. And sometimes you say, well, why should there be a choice? But some of us are in school with people that uh, are from these countries. Some of us work with people that are from both countries, so it's going to be interesting. But can you share some insights on that? Oh,
Yeah, you're asking me, right, Brother Drummer?
yes, sir.
All right. Well, I think what you say is key in terms of a lot of people who out there who may not know exactly what's going on and what's happening. And I'm just going to try and put it in some particular situation so we have a clear sense of it. Now, because we're in the country that we're in, the United States of America, this is a country that has vastly become, and a lot of us don't realize this, multicultural to the point to now where it's kind of hard to defend and define what America is. And that's one of the reasons why you have the what I call the identity crisis of some of these so-called white patriots or these Christian fundamentalist type of folks who are going off, on all of these rampages, like at the U.S. Capitol and on January 6th and these type of things, because they feel like they're losing their grip on power and they're losing their grip on who they are. And they feel that America is becoming a place of all of these others and they don't have any place in it. But part of the reason why they feel that way is because a lot of them are so intractable in terms of their ideas of what America is supposed to be. And it's that old paradigm of America just being a all white nation that basically supports a white supremacist type of ideology and everything. Even those who may not support white supremacy as an active type of instrument, they are in fact benefiting from it. And so when they see this coming down with all these hordes of other people coming in from everywhere else, then they get, scared. and they get kind of paranoid. So we need to put that in the context of what's happening with this whole thing as well. The other thing that is going on specifically with this whole situation in quote unquote Palestine / Israel is it's a movement and a pivoting for global dominance. Now, what do I mean when I say global dominance? I'm talking about with the whole Israeli thing, their particular government that's in there right now with the Netanyahus of the world and all like that, basically are looking for opportunities for expansion. Now, it's been said on the show before previously, but I need to say it again, that this Hamas organization was in fact created by the Israeli state as a counterbalance initially to have a fall guy to further their efforts and everything. All right. Now, allegedly, it's been changed and everything, and they tried to distance themselves from their origins. But fact of the matter is, between the CIA, the Israeli Mossad, and all these other things, it was an entity that was created to further their interests and also to infiltrate, quote unquote, and cause confusion among all the other Arab groups who might have been against them, from the PLO to Hezbollah in the Lebanon and Iran hook up with this diagram and all of these other people. So they were thrown in there to throw confusion in the mix. So the fact that you have an Israeli government apparatus that is one of the most advanced on the planet and is acknowledged as one of the top intelligence agency, if not the top, is definitely one of the top three. For this thing of them to be able to kidnap these people and everything is just total craziness. It smacks back to what happened with 9/11 in this country, when all of a sudden you had hair trigger alert for things happening, and all of a sudden a plane was able to get through and hit the building, and then people were deployed away from their regular stations and everything. All this happened during 9/11, and a lot of it initially came out, and a lot of that information after time went on and you had all these conflicting reports was suppressed. And people who had stated things about it were suddenly disappeared and everything, okay? Or if not disappeared, silenced and didn't have anything else to say for fear of their lives, which is why they didn't have anything to say. And these are the people who are true patriots who would have pointed out what happened was a collusion and everything to make that happen. The same playbook and game plan is being used in this whole situation with so-called Hamas and the Israeli government there under this Netanyahu guy, in order to basically initiate a purge. Now, those of y'all who are in the horror movies and everything like that have probably heard of the Purge series, where all of this stuff happens and they have a night where everybody can just go wild and kill everybody and whatnot. And then they have peace under a quote unquote Christian fundamentalist government here in this country. Well, basically, if you look at that premise and how it plays out in that, where everybody's wild, and what's happening in those movies is exactly what's happening in this Israeli-Palestinian situation right now. And it's a purge of the Palestinian people who have nothing to do with this whole thing with Hamas, but they're using the Hamas hostage situation as an excuse to indiscriminately slaughter those people over there, okay? Now, it's a land expansion grab, but it goes beyond that. It goes beyond actually consolidating, which is why Biden says whatever Israel do, we're with them and everything, and ain't trying to really do anything about it, is because years ago, before he became president, when he was a congressperson, he was speaking up that, our interests are inextricably tied to Israel's, and that whatever they do as a government entity, we're with them. We've got too much money invested. He said that on the congressional floor. You can go look up, tapes and, footage of that and everything. This is what he said, okay? So he's never wavered and backed off that issue, which is why he's really compromised in terms of his ability to lead anybody out of anything.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people don't like to talk about Biden because he's the Democrat and all this like that, but he's been a compromised person even before he got that office. So let's be real clear on that.
But I wanted
Go ahead, brother,
because I had a question coming from the audience. Because
Mm-hmm.
people, you just said, and we look at the situation in the Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
look at Russia as an expansionist type uh, government. And we saying that the people in the Ukraine are, you know, being trampled over by a Goliath. However, there seems not to be any sympathy for the people, uh, the Palestinians over there, because when you look at this apartheid type system, this occupational type system, uh, we see two different things. Even the world, the United Nations, nobody's calling for Israel to, well, some people are now, but they weren't calling for them to, you know, step down their assault. Now, in the Ukraine, the United States, we went full speed ahead. Everybody put the little signs up and said, we got to help the Ukrainian people. Not to put that effort down, but when we look at the people in Palestine, when I look at the news reports, they never come back as human beings. It's always terrorists, Hamas, some type of negative or derogatory term to minimize them as a people, as human beings. One of the things that we're finding now is that people are starting to look at them as human beings. One of the things, and I always remember Dr. King and many others were always sympathetic with the Palestine effort, because during the same time, that was when apartheid was going down in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And even Dr. King's daughter now, she's leading some efforts towards bringing awareness. But when we see that these are regular human beings just like us, okay? And for some reason, whether it be America or some parts of the rest, especially some parts of the European nation, they don't see that they have a right to resist.
Okay. You raised some interesting points, Drummer. Let me try and adjust and address as many of them as possible in terms of connecting with the original theme that I laid out there. First of all, this country probably leads the world in terms of the abject dehumanization of other human beings by dint of its history of slavery in this country and by the enslavement of people of African descent in this nation called America. That
Mm.
was a over 400-year process, which we came out of as African heritage people during the war between the states after 1865. And there was a period called Reconstruction where there was actually some very progressive stuff going on, and where you actually had the support of the radical Republicans, if you will. And I do mean radical because they were about, rights and all like this, and supported, you know, schools and things like that. Black folks actually had their first Congress people during that period. There are at
Yeah.
least 12 Black congressmen from the South, I mind you, from the
Oh
South,
yeah.
who were elected during the period of Reconstruction. So what happened is that you had that going down with that, and you have progressive stuff happening all over the place. As a matter of fact, you would not have public education in the United States were it not for the period of Reconstruction with all the freedom schools and everything that were popping up after the time once the war ended. And what they don't tell you is that as many black kids up in there, all them poor white kids didn't have a problem being up in them schools with those black kids during the post Civil War in the Reconstruction area. It was as full as those poor white kids as it was black children getting an education, because they didn't have a public education system in the South. And they
Right.
didn't have one in the North either. So basically, the things that came out of the freedom schools and things like that laid the foundation for creating public education in this country, which didn't exist prior to the Civil War. If you had children going to school and everything, they were basically going because they were the children of rich planters, and they sent them off to London, Paris, and all these other places like that based on the wealth that they had stolen from the labor of those people who were unjustly enslaved in that period, who didn't receive any compensation for the labor that they put in building this country called America, which is one of the reasons why they had to call for reparations that need to be given to the people who, when they're and their descendants. And even if you're not talking about slavery, we're talking about the redress of all of the discrimination and everything that happened here. Now you parallel that to what's going on with what's happening with the Palestinians, which literally have no rights and no type of recourse, where at least we were able to do it in this country, which is one of the reasons why they're trying to systemically decimate our population in this country right now, because we've always been the conscience of America. I'm talking about African heritage people here in America who had been enslaved but who broke out of it, and have always put America on blast for the vile, foul things that they do, especially the American government. Part of the problem with America and the populations of the American people is that there are some who definitely don't agree with it, but like I say, they get benefits from it, so they ain't gonna holler it too loud. And there are some folks who just bought whole soul and cart into the whole racist ideology of this country and everything, and to have no problem trying to suppress people like that. That's why they're hoping to bring in a new population that's not as slick, or that's not as aware and not as savvy in terms of letting all these other folks come in illegally, giving them all types of breaks and stuff that they haven't given to anybody here, okay, who've been here, who suffered for decades in crime-ridden neighborhoods and all like that, and just want to have a leg up. I'm gonna tell you something, Brother Drummer. Most Black people in America, if you would leave them alone and allow them to do in their businesses, allow them to live their lives outside, they would be quite content and happy and would be cool. But even when you're not doing something that's dealing with them, they do always want to come and destroy and take your stuff. And even if you're not impacting them, if the thing is, they don't want you to have anything. And it's the same thing that's going on with the Palestinians. So the parallels are clear and open in terms of what this mindset and this mentality is about. It is a white supremacist, racist mentality with genocidal intent on anybody who looks other. And that includes those people who are Semites, by the way. So since the Palestinians are Semites, if you call it again, you can't play that game about it's anti-Semitic and everything, because they're Semites. Okay, so they got to deal with that. Now, the other thing is you got to look at the region of the world, what they call the so-called Middle East. Like the poem Gil Scott-Heron said, Egypt, Libya, and Algeria, they used to be in Africa. They since been moved to the Middle East, okay? Now, that's a real key statement, because if you look at the map, most of those places they're talking about is either directly in Africa, but has been geographically shifted in terms of a new null region called the Middle East. But what it is still Africa in the midst of all of that. And what they're trying to do is basically make an expansion move over in Africa. And now that's been complicated by these people rising up. Take, for example, in the places like Burkina Faso and what's the other country? Mali and some of those places where they've had, dictators. In the time that those guys have, excuse me, not dictators, uprisings. In the time those guys have had uprisings over there with the puppets who were basically fronts for the colonial interests, their GDP of their countries are some of the fastest rising in the world now. Whereas before they were people hunkered in poverty, can't do anything. But since they said we're taking our land and we're going to educate our people and we want to do this and that for our folks, money ain't going to Swiss banks and all this, because Switzerland is so-called neutral, is complicit, because they are basically a criminal operation that are money laundering all these billions of dollars really from all these dictators and everyone else who serve colonial interests, who had been in there, like that dude Mobutu down in Zaire, who killed the rightfully elected Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba in the Congo way back in 1961, and has been running ragged and raping that country ever since. While, I've got all of these minerals and stuff, cobalt, uranium, all of these other things that are in a place like the Congo, but yet the people are starving on the streets. It's a disgrace and a madness that this is allowed to happen. And it's because of greedy people like that. But now folks are seeing that in order for them to have prosperous, healthy countries, their people's got to be healthy and prosperous. So the people now who are taking up and overthrowing these and kicking these people out of there, they kicked the French out, the best thing they could have done in those countries, because France, along with England, were one of the colonial powers who basically helped to put Africa in the state of poverty that it is in right now. So all of that impacts on Israel, because what's happening, okay, there are a lot of people now who are talking about the possibility of a third world war because of what's happening in that region. But the third world war is actually going to really be fought by proxy nations, which is what Israel is, a proxy nominally of the United States, though it's got its own agenda and interest. And just like some of those other countries who are working alongside the Russians are proxies, and they are using their proxies to fight their little battles, because they know if it goes to the big guys going in, it will be a thermonuclear war. Thankfully, they put some safeguards in the place to keep that from happening, because they realize they were on the road to total annihilation, but they still want to play the political games. And so they will use people of color, but especially black people. I'm gonna just say black people, because we the ones who are always getting the brunt of this stuff, you know, from being moved and removed and all this other stuff. They want to use us as the whipping board for this. And a lot of folks, thank God, in Africa ain't having it no more. So they kicked them out. And now their GDPs are rising. They're being able to feed their people. They're being able to build schools and stuff like that. And it's because they finally realized the colonial game, and they're not going for the tricks anymore. And they are not just aligned with the US, they're aligned with whoever is going to bring something that they're going to bring for, and they're using their cultural identities and their cultural realities to frame their economic and political realities, which is the piece that had been missing in the past. Go ahead, Brother Drum. I know you've been trying to get in.
Pick up a strong point. I know we brought that up. I think last week we were talking about there are some other major players. When you talk about the big boys, whether it's China, Russia, even India.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, people forget about India. That now they have an interest in Africa. Once the African nations removed the British people after the Queen died, they started pushing back down in the Caribbean, all the way over everything that was colonialized, Nigeria, Liberia, Sierra Leone, all these countries are asking and requesting and demanding and pushing these European colonizers out. Now, and at the same time, China is coming in, whether it's through the back door or whatever. You know, people say China's buying up the United States, but excuse me, they're also
and actually
Africa.
Go.
You know, they're getting a large portion of Africa. And when you start looking at it, these are these resources, these minerals, and all this type of stuff. And then meanwhile, Russia is looking at this situation because they're supplying people, and they're saying that if the United States and the United Nations and European Union don't leave the Ukraine alone, then they're gonna have a problem with them. So there's when people think about the next, we call it the next world war. Now, people in the religious community, for some weird assumption, they think this is an Arab Christian battle, but it's a lot deeper than that, because these powers want to control the actions and the efforts of all those folk within that region. That's been the PowerPoint ever since the British had it back in the 1900s when they had it, and then they used these people's religious belief to move and motivate them to believe that they had their best interest. And it wasn't a spiritual or religious interest, it was a capitalist type interest of acquiring more territory, controlling more land, and controlling more the efforts of the people in those areas when it came down to resources. And I know people, they say, oh man, this is the hot spot. The Bible talk about this spot. Especially, I just finished talking to a pastor, and he was like, man, this is where it's gonna go down. This is, not to say that ain't part of it, but these people, these countries have used people's belief systems to move and motivate them in their behavior. And especially, you brought the point up of black people. Now we're fighting, especially over here, because we're behind this side of the curtain. But our brothers and sisters over on the continent are looking at it from a point of we'll align ourselves with anybody other than who has been taking our resources, not giving us nothing. The French, the English, all these folk have been taken for so long, and even though we're talking about this little dot of which is still in Africa, what is called Israel now, but that's still a piece of Africa that they're trying to take, and they're trying to control that little area around the Suez Canal, all this type stuff. But I guess my question would be, where do you see these other superpowers positioning themselves?
Well, here's the thing. The entire world political map as it stands right now, they're all jockeying for position because the U.S., even though it still has a lot of, its stuff, is no longer the dominant influencer of political power. So even though they have political and military power to a certain extent, in the real sense, China actually has the largest military in the world right now. And they are vastly growing in terms of doing battleships and building and everything like that. So they're preparing for stuff. The other thing is that the U.S. and also the European colonials are so used to thieving because how Africa became colonized in the first place, it was a so-called gentleman's agreement in 1884 at the Berlin Conference of 1884, where the major European powers all got together with a gentleman's agreement, so-called gentlemen, because they were rogues and scallywags, to carve up the African continent so that each body would have a piece of it. So the ones who really got shortchanged were like Portugal, which used to be a major power, who started the whole thing with the slave trade and everything. But over the years, they lost influence and power. And Spain also used to be the major power back in the 1400s and stuff. And they've since diminished. So the major players who came out of that 1884 conference with huge swaths of land were primarily Britain and France. Okay.
Right.
Germany also had their share in places like what's now known as Benin. The Germans were heavy there, and that other place that's next door to Benin. Portions of Nigeria also, but most of that also was British too. So it was carved up in a really kind of haphazard way, which totally ignored natural boundaries and natural relationships with the peoples there. And it's basically fostered a bunch of confusion that's happening in places like Nigeria, which caused that war in 1967, the Biafran War, because of the interference of the British and the things that they laid down in colonial times, exacerbated relationships with the people there, where they can't get, Nigeria, in a real sense, while it's one of the most populous and most largest countries in the African continent, it's a kind of a mess in a real sense. And a lot of Nigerians will probably take offense to this, but if they being real and they know their history, they know that that's the truth. And one of the reasons is because you had various groups of people who, because of the way the British carved up the country, are in one land, caused all of this ethnic discord and everything. Now, on some level, they were able to work it out, but even to this day, it still exists because of the disparity from certain groups of people getting stuff, and it resulted in the culture of corruption, which, while Nigeria is rich based on that oil that they have there, it still basically caused a lot of things that has caused equalities there as a country. Now, Nigerians will argue back and forth, how can you talk about Nigeria and this and that? It's the truth, okay? And deal with the truth, and then you might be able to go and solve your problems instead of always trying to fight somebody or argue somebody down when they call out the truth about the faults and about your shortcomings of what's happening in your country. But it's not just limited to Nigeria, because the same thing happened to India. In 1947 in India, Do you know, bad as things were, and as contentious as they were in Nigeria, it was nowhere as bad as what happened in India. In India, after 47, you had over millions of people killed in ethnic religious battles because of the lines and stuff that were drawn. In fact, so bad they had to wind up creating the state of Pakistan,
Right.
which was basically Islamic. And then you had the Hindus, and then that whole jacked up caste system that they have over there. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about you, India, and your caste system because it's wicked, it's wrong, and you do a lot of people, particularly if you're dark skinned over there, bad. So it needs to be called out and everything. And then they're the ones who got the nerve. They have these other things about these other people. So all of these things confluence and come into conjunction with each other, and they cause these new paradigms. Now, what's happened with India is they finally figured, out the way. And also, India is also one of the people in the nuclear club because they somehow got a bomb. And I'm not sure if Pakistan has one, but I know India definitely is a part of the nuclear game.
Yeah. Well, you just said something, and especially when I talk to some of my brothers and sisters in the religious community, because a lot of times we get not to say that biblical text doesn't point out certain things, but these.
Let me just say this where the Bible is concerned, Brother Drummer, and I think it's key to note this. And then I just wanted to put this point out there. I'm gonna let you continue. When you're talking about the Bible, basically, if you look at what's happening with it, everything in the Bible has come true. Now, it may not call all the names of the players up to the date, but in terms of the general outline, in terms of stuff, is spot on. Has not been any deviation. And if folks don't believe it, they need to really read their Bibles and check it in terms of that. So it correlates and it corresponds to what's happening and everything. Now, we're just dealing primarily with the secular here, and that's where I'm going to focus. But I got to put that point in that a lot of the stuff with the folks with the Bible, they may not all know and understand interpretation, but they know enough to know that a lot of the stuff that's going on is definitely reflected in the Bible. Okay, my brother, please continue with your point. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I definitely agree that book is point on a lot of these issues and situations. Because the names of these countries have changed, back in the day.
Exactly.
Especially, they didn't, even when under the King James and all of them, they didn't put the names of those countries like England, France, Russia, China, United States.
They wouldn't have known them as that then from those days either.
No, they might have been known as something else. But like you say, these things are shaping up now, and we're starting to see it shape up. We don't know when that day, that hour. Like I say, people from the spiritual world, they look at it as a war of Armageddon. Okay. In the secular world, they might look at it as a world war. They say all these countries, at some point, there's like some rival gangs. At some point, with all the stuff that each one has been doing, supplying weapons under the table to each other to either break down or take over another country's, capabilities. Especially like in the African country, we can go back, like you said, when they decided how they was going to carve up Africa. Back then, Belgium was a major player. We don't even hear about Belgium now, but Belgium, the damage that they did in the Congo, they just that guy's no, I forgot that brother's name. They just removed his statue out of the Congo. He killed over.
Yeah, it was actually King Leopold who was the butcher of the Congo. You talk about Hitler killing people back in World War II. King Leopold was 10 times worse than Hitler in terms of what he did to the Congolese people. That's fact. That is fact. Look it up. It's fact.
Well, we see some of that brutality now over in that area, the Gaza Strip, all those areas. If someone, and this is where it gets crazy. If someone, and this is the Israeli government, if they suspect someone in your family is being a sympathizer with anyone that's against them. They will wreak harm on the brother, the sister, or the cousin of that family. Okay. Now, in under the what Geneva Convention, the Articles of War, how to properly do a war.
Mm.
Those are things that big countries don't do, even though they do it under the table, but they just don't go out face, showing you their face that this is what they're doing. And that's one of the bad things about what's going down in Israel right now. Even though the United States has done some underlying things, a lot of these other countries have done some and created and taken out leaders and put leaders in place and did and done all kind of things. Now we're seeing this real life up close. We're seeing how they're treating these people, and these are regular people like us that's fighting back. For the first time, because I had a conversation with a brother at the barbershop, he was like, and these folk, a lot of them look just alike. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's when you got this is an ethnic cleansing, just like in the Ukraine.
It's exactly an ethnic cleansing, but the difference is that they literally want to wipe these people out. They have these things in the Ukraine, but it's really interesting that the Ukraine, and a lot of people don't remember this, but one of the reasons why the Ukraine is such an ironic proxy is because Ukraine was where a lot of the ex-Nazis fled to after World War II when they were trying to escape, going to Nuremberg and standing trial for their crimes against humanity and stuff. A lot of them went in. So a lot of the racist stuff that went down, like when the African students were trying to get off and they were throwing them off the trains and stuff when the war first started there, that's the mindset of them. And then when they were talking about resettling some of these Ukrainians over here in the States, some of them said that they, wanted to only be in white neighborhoods and didn't want to be with the black and the Spanish people. These are things that they said, okay? And these are attitudes that they have. So if you're talking about bringing these types of people as the replacements of folks who are here, then most people here who know what the deal is going to have some problems and everything with that because of the mentality and the mindset that they have. But these are who the people are aligned with, and they are aligned with them because even though they're ex-Nazis, they're proxies over in that area. So they're fighting where they can't directly fight, because then it would get into a real big thing with, jets coming in and doing, with all the bigger weapons and stuff. So they have them not only fight the wars, but they have them test weapons that they want tested on the field. And that's why they're getting all this new weapon tech that they're using and everything. So it's some really foul business to doing it. I need to speak to the Chinese, though, because one of the things that the Chinese has done is that they actually come in and they actually say that, look, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And it'll be a deal of when they're dealing with these African nations, unlike the Europeans, they'll come up with some type of agreement. They'll actually do something. They'll build a road and they don't leave it, because when the countries got their independence in the 60s, in the 50s and 60s, I should say, because the real African colonial overthrow began in the mid to late 1950s all the way into the 60s. The countries like Belgium and France and everything like that, what they would do when they were leaving, they would tear out all their infrastructure and they would tear out all the wires and stuff like that, try and blow up roads if they could do that. And they left it. So they leave the country in the shambles. So then they say, oh, yeah, you may kick us out and you may have your independence, but you're going to need us and everything. And so this is how they came in with the concept of neo-colonialism, where they weren't directly there, but they had their puppets or their proxy stooges who were there doing their will and basically doing everything for the European country, but without any allegiance to the cultural realities of the people in those countries where they were living. That is the insidiousness of colonial power. The other piece of it is that they were getting uranium and stuff for something like 0.08 cents on the dollar or some crazy amount like that. So since they kicked them out, they've upped the price and everything. And that's one of the reasons why the GNP of the African nations are going up, because they're actually charging a fair price and getting it directly for their resources instead of having these people over there kicking out. That's why France and them are just having a fit and they want to send battleships over there. Oh, yeah.
They
People
upset.
ain't talking about the French that are sending battleships over going into Africa and everything with all the atrocities that are going on and everything. But guess what? The folks are going to fight because they're not going to fight individually. Now they know that they ain't going to have to take regional and even continent-wide approaches in terms of dealing with it. So there's a political maturation that's happening on the African continent in terms of it. The United States is pissed too because they wanted to set up an AFRICOM in Africa, so they'd already be there because prior to Bush first going over there and then Obama coming in and consolidating it, they didn't really have a presence in Africa. The one thing they can say that they didn't have, because the other ones, but they had since looked to do one, and they've got proxy state, their main proxy state for that over there in terms of any incursions and taking over or just trying to just rape and take the minerals out of the lands of Africa without giving nothing in compensation to the people is Israel. That's their role. The Israeli government is the one that is actually doing that with people and fascists like Netanyahu and everything like that. And let me tell you this, you know, they always want to talk about the Holocaust and everything, and it was a horrible thing and it did happen. But I'm going to tell you what this Netanyahu government with these troops and everything over in Gaza Strip and these places like that, the West Bank, what they're doing to those people is exactly the same type of tactics that the Nazis used on a lot of their people who were killed, the 6 million Jews who were killed over in Nazi Germany doing what they call the Holocaust. So now they're actually perpetrating a Palestinian Holocaust, this Israeli government there, and it's so bad and it's so shameful. That's why the Jewish people or Israeli citizens are protesting against the government's actions and what they're doing, because it's clearly fascist, it's clearly racist, and it's clearly Nazi Israel. It's a Nazi Israeli state that's happening, that's perpetrating these things. And I know they'll cringe when they hear it, but they can just cringe because it's nothing but the truth, and the world sees it for what it is. Go ahead, brother.
Because of the media and how we look at stuff now, you know, for the first time in a long time, you can call it conspiracy theory or whatever. It
ain't no conspiracy when it's out in the open and you can see what's happening. So they can just throw the conspiracy out because it's clear.
Yeah, we all can see it. But one of the things, and people have been asking me this because they said, Drummer, what is this thing about a two-state? Because when we look at, you got Israel, we look at the occupied territory, we hear the Gaza Strip, we hear the West Bank, we hear about the Golan Heights. But when they talk about a two-state, if it can get to that, you know, because right now there's more pressure from other countries to make a two-state type system happen. You know, they say, I think back in 1968, they said when they had one of the battles, that was one of the things on the table, but then they kicked that out and just ignored it. But do you see the possibility of breaching some type of agreement, especially in the area of a two-state solution?
Here's the deal with the two-state solution. They basically killed it when they assassinated Yitzhak Premier, who was the prime minister back in about 95, who actually was working with Yasser Arafat, who was head of the Palestine Liberation Organization. And they had a cordial working relationship. And there were many ultra-fascist Zionist Israelis over there who hated that. So he was assassinated by his own people. Orthodox Israelis claim it was a lone gunman type of thing, but he was done by some of the Netanyahu types and everything. They assassinated Yitzhak Tarir. And I remember seeing in a news interview on CBS, Yasser Arafat talking about it. He says, "Oh no, he was a good man. He was gone." I mean, these guys were, you know, adversaries for years, but they had enough to come together to an accord and was getting ready to make that happen. And you had forces, the people who are now in power over in Israel now, who were so against it that they sent one of their rabid people to go and assassinate this man who's the prime minister. So if you remember at the time, there was a lot of rumor and rumbling about Colin Powell running for president, and he would have ran for president. But after they assassinated the Israeli prime minister, he said, "Oh man, you know, I'm not doing that." You know, his wife practically begged him not to run when they found out that Yitzhak Shamir was assassinated by an Orthodox Israeli sect. You know,
Wow.
who was part of actually some of the people who are in power over there right now, who are orchestrating this genocide, this mass slaughter of people over there. So those are the folks who would do that, because Paul said, well, you know, wow, if they got him, I know they'll get me and they'll come for me. So he didn't want no parts of that,
Want that?
which is why he didn't run for president. Because had he ran for president, he would have won. He would have beat Clinton too.
That time period, most
And Clinton knew that. And Clinton knew that. Yeah.
Well,
but see, these are the things that happen, and that in America we have a what do you call it? A attention deficit disorder, in terms of, you know, we forget historical memory and stuff like that. But some of us ain't been afflicted with that, and we remember some of these things well when it happened, even when they try to erase it and down. If you get the initial hits, you got the real deal. Then they'll try and follow it later on and try and erase it and everything. But yeah, all those things happen, and all of that plays in to what's going on. They assassinated their own prime minister, who was coming to the resolution of a two-state resolution in terms of the Palestinian stuff and recognition of it back in '95. Okay, so in terms of the direct answer to your question, at this point in time, that resolution is basically dead. Even though, ironically, around the world, even though they're not recognized as such, every other country except this one and some others, and certainly all of them in South America, recognize the Palestinians as a state right now, even though they don't have official statehood status because of what's going on with the Israeli thing, which is real interesting. So this government in Israel refuses to recognize them as a state.
Well, one of the things, and well, it might be in our lifetime, but you got a different type of people. Well, one of the things, I was reading an article, and it's hard to get, you know, with all the devastation that's been done over the last couple of weeks. I know it was devastation done as far back as 2-3 years ago, but now we're seeing it up close. You know, and we're seeing it from different angles, different people going in there, bringing it up. There's a lot more pressure from the rest of the world. And that's why I was asking, and I had the question come out of the audience, where they said, well, maybe, I know what happened back in '95, that, you know, that was awful, but maybe at least within the next 10-15 years, you think there's a possibility with a new regime, because Netanyahu is not going to be here forever. You think that with the old heads dying out and a new younger generation coming on board, do you think that they will seek some type of peace?
If this system of things as it exists right now continues, it's really hard to say, because here's the problem. One of the things that's been really effective with these people, and you see it here in this country, you thought you had a whole generation of folk who died out with that whole old South mentality, with the Jim Crow line and everything like that. But fact of the matter is, they're training some of their young people who have become even more violent and have adopted some of the more edgier tactics than even their forefathers had, in terms of, you know, revealing their racism. They still got a bunch of the dummies in there, but they've got some folks who actually got some sense, who've been brainwashed by that ideology. And because some of them have been raised by that, and that's all they know, it's the same thing with some of those folks over there. You got some folks, even though you got the old heads dying out, they've indoctrinated some younger people who coming in with just this vile, or they got the vengeance thing going on, or somebody close to them died in this mess and everything. So unless they're really open-minded and really want to see some truths, you're still going to have that, you know, mindset, you know, going and everything. The only thing that I say that can do, if you're working from the confines of this system, and, you know, this thing is so volatile, depending on who's in there, who's not in there, it could erupt or, you know, blow anyway at any time, except for, divine intervention, if you will, is that it's going to have to be some folks really good at the gatekeeping and good at when I say gatekeeping, I'm talking about who are resistance and who have the adopted ways of humanity. And the other thing is this, Drummer, and this goes for all of them across the board. They got to get off this thing of hating black people. I mean, globally, because it's the thing that we're being attacked on all levels and hated for whatever group. And even if they're oppressed and everything, they might be oppressed and they call for help. But as soon as they get a little help, then they still want to oppress us. So until they get rid of that notion and they come to peace with that, they're never going to find any peace. You get to the piece where you stop bothering black folk and let people live, then all the other stuff going to fall in place. That's my take on that.
Well, it's definitely been a good conversation, brother Akibulan, and definitely a lot of great information. We got to bring you back. We're going to continue these conversations.
It's always an honor and a pleasure to be with you, folks.
Thank you, brother. Any contact? Thank you, brother. Definitely. Any contact information? Anything you want to give out? Any closing words?
I guess you can reach me at brothersower@gmail.com. brothersower@gmail.com.
Well, thank you, my brother. For everybody else out there that's joining us, either on Facebook, Instagram, I hope that this brought some light to your conversation when we talk about this situation. This land, which is currently known as Israel, has been sacred to the Hebrews or the Jewish people for thousands of years. Today that land is sacred to a plethora of various religions. That's the religious belt. Everybody pretty much has a place of worship around that area. The Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, everybody. So it's a very important space. We encourage you to do your own research, look at and be ready to have conversation. I believe that anytime you can have a conversation, there's always opportunity for enlightenment and sometimes forgiveness and reconstruction, where people become, because we're all people at the end of the day, and I believe that we can live in peace. I know there's a lot of distracting factors that make it very difficult for people to come together. People harden their hearts based on beliefs or trauma or anything that happened to them. But we believe that we all human beings. We want to live together. And I am always reminded of a movie, I think War of the Worlds, and the aliens come down and say, well, the humans ask the aliens, can we live in peace? And the aliens say, no, we cannot live in peace. But I hope as human beings that we can find a way to live in peace. And that's our good news for today. I encourage you to stay ready, be prepared, do your own due diligence, keep your head on the swivel, pay attention wherever you are, because there are people out there that's not going to be willing to dialogue or have a conversation, or your words, or your actions, or your behavior can trigger them with the hatred and it's in their heart. But it's also some good people out there. But be careful at all times, prepare yourselves at all times, and we will continue to focus on those things over here on the We Are Ready that can help us survive in this world that we live in. So make sure you like, subscribe, and share over here our Square Mile Media Atlanta. And we'll see you next week. This is Reginal Drummer, the peopleologist and author of the book. Find them, focus, follow up, and finish. And I hope we can find some peace. Let's make it a great day.